Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Ikigai Leadership. My name is Drew B. Harlow, and I'm here with a good friend, Judy Kane of Aligned Consciousness. Judy says some really cool stuff with somatic coaching and with really helping people to change beliefs that really affect them in all kinds of ways. Judy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. It's really fascinating the work you do. So I'll let you tell it, but you'll tell it much better than I will. So please tell us what you do.
I help people change subconscious beliefs. And sometimes people don't know what those are, but they form about 95% of our perception of the world. And we get most of them by the time we're 7 years old. Usually, we don't even know exactly how they got there. It's not necessarily something you were told, it might be something you observed in your environment. But so they're important because 95% of your perception, that is your reality, right?
Oh yeah.
And frequently, those subconscious beliefs can be limiting you in some way. Once you've grown up, they might not support your conscious goals. So, when people notice patterns that are causing frustration or um, any overwhelm or other emotions that are not on the positive side, um, they can change these things. And that's what I help them do.
That's awesome. We did a session a few weeks back with that it was really cool to see how the process works. It also felt a little weird because obviously it's not stuff we're used to doing on a regular basis, but it was cool to see it work. Now, tell us what you're doing when you work with your clients, like in the session, like kind of what steps do you go through on your side of things?
All right. So when they come in, I'm always with the assumption that they know they have something they want to change. I've had a couple of people show up just out of curiosity with nothing to change. And that's kind of weird. But most people come in, they know there's something that they want to be different. And so we talk about what's going on now and what would they rather be experiencing. Don't need to know how they got to what's going on now. So there's no need to go back in history, figure out sources of things. We just need to know what they do want now. And then we kind of um, figure out the beliefs that are preventing the now from being the future and change those beliefs in the subconscious.
Hmm.
I don't work with behaviors or strategies. I focus purely on transforming those beliefs. So we can do a fair amount of work in an hour, which is my typical session. And as you saw, it's not weird stuff. It's pretty, I mean, it's not familiar things, but it's not weird stuff that you do. And it's a very direct process that helps you get to the subconscious and rewrite specific beliefs that are in there.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to frame it. It's unfamiliar. It's not weird, right? It's just something people probably haven't done before. I don't
Probably
do on a
not.
regular basis.
Yeah.
So you told me a little bit about I mean, we had our own session, but for me about my beliefs about different things. But you also told me some things like in terms of the way it manifests in the body. Like people can have beliefs that lead to migraines, or they can lead to other kinds of chronic pain. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I've seen it work so many times. It's not a surprise, but it's still kind of awesome to see the mind body connection be that specific and sometimes that immediate.
Hmm.
So, migraines, I've helped quite a few people that were in an event with me that said they were going to have to leave because they had a migraine. And I've been able to help them change a belief that was causing the migraine, usually in less than 5 minutes, so that they could stay and continue participating in whatever it was. I've had clients that have come in with all sorts of pain issues or mobility issues and those are the ones where you usually see or more likely to see a fast difference, right? I mean, some conditions, you're not going to see a difference immediately. It takes a while for those to change, but pain and mobility are frequently things that you can see. It's just the mobility is back or the pain is gone after changing just a small number of beliefs.
Yeah, and that tangible stuff. I mean, it's got to be amazing to see it happen in the moment.
It really is. Yeah, yeah. um and it just stuns me every time, the power of it.
Yeah. What was the coolest example you can think of?
Gosh, one of the Well, I've had a lot of them. I think one that was just the most surprising to me. There was a man who'd had pain going down his leg forever,
Mhm.
down the side of his leg, and he didn't come for that. He had something else that he wanted to work with, but we finished that, and there was time. I said, "Well, what else do you want to do?" Right? We got more time in the session, and he said, "Well, what about this?" And I said, "Sure, we can try to do that." And so we did. We only did like we call it a balance when you rewrite a belief. We only
Mhm.
did, I think, one balance. And I said, "What's it feel like now?" And he dropped down into a squat on the floor. This was when I was seeing people in person. And I was a little alarmed because he was a large man, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do if he couldn't get up. So he dropped into a squat, and then he stood back up again, and he's going, "It feels great." And it's like, well, I'm so glad, right? I was seeing him. He had bought a package, so the next time he came, I asked him how his leg was doing, right? And he said the pain had not come back.
Wow.
All of his coworkers and family were asking him what he'd done because he wasn't limping anymore. And he said he couldn't tell them because it just sounded, he didn't think any of them would believe it. So he made up something, but it was pretty impressive when it happened.
That's super cool. Yeah, because I mean, so many people who deal with these kind of things, and that you never think that it's a belief that's causing them. So
Right.
thinking back, like how'd you get into this work? How'd you get into the psyche work?
From an unlikely sounding place, I was in IT management. Um, and so people think that's a weird leap. But it's not really when you look backwards on it,
Mhm.
because people come in with systems and they want the systems to be acting differently, right? And that's what
Right.
I did in IT as well. So it's not really that different. But I was not well versed in most energy types of work. This is kind of categorized as a energy psychology. If you had to find a name for it, that's what Bruce Lipton calls it.
Mhm.
But I didn't disbelieve anything, but I wasn't that familiar with most modalities that were out there.
Mhm.
But my husband at the time had a lot of friends who were, and he had some ache or pain. I don't remember what it was. And one of the friends said, "You want me to help with that?" And he said, "Sure." And I was watching, and usually they would do things that was moving energy and, they were sensing things that I was not um, privy to, really.
Mhm.
But what they did was, it was a very direct thing. It was not, they weren't interpreting any messages. They weren't sensing where energy was or moving it or doing anything like that. It was just a really straightforward process that I could see I could learn how to do. And the pain went away. So
Yeah.
um, that was startling in and of itself, that in less than 5 minutes, this discomfort was gone.
Yeah.
And the fact that I could see it was something I could learn. So I started learning everything I could about it, because there's such potential with what you can do with it.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. I mean, being able to regulate and not even regulate, but just completely get rid of pain, chronic pain, especially with people, because so many people I know, there's so many people out there who suffer from that, right? Who suffer
Mhm.
from chronic pain, and their only thought is to manage it with narcotics, or some opioids, or different things, pain
Yeah.
medication, because that's the only thing that works for them, right? I mean, they've tried everything else, and well, almost everything, obviously. And and they don't, but that's the other part of it too, is that they don't think that is an option. I don't think there's any publicity around it. So what are folks doing to get the word out more about this, in terms of as an option of things to people, for people to consider?
Well, the process I use is called Psych K, and it's been around since the 80s. It's taught and practiced all around the world.
Hmm.
Uh, so, I mean, some people know about it.
Yeah.
um, it's not out there to learn as a do-it-yourself thing, so it
Hmm.
hasn't spread necessarily like tapping or some other things that you can watch along online and do some things yourself at home.
Sure.
Um, that was by design, because they wanted to make sure that everybody learned it the same way.
No, that makes sense. Quality
Yeah,
control is essential with this kind of stuff. Absolutely.
absolutely. Right. So their instructors are, they keep, they make sure that the instructors are all taught in the same way and are teaching in as similar a way as different people can, right?
Hmm.
Um, to keep it close to the way it was intended.
Yeah. No, I mean that makes sense. That makes perfect sense because you don't want, frankly, you don't want what's happening with coaching to be happen with this, where everyone's like, "Oh, yeah, I do that, yeah, sure," and then you mess someone up.
Oh
Instead of
yeah,
like,
well, and that's the other. You can't do harm with this, which is another reason I feel very comfortable doing it.
yeah, no, that's super cool.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting modality to practice because, like I said, it's something where even watching you work, it's fascinating because you can see you're doing stuff. You see, I mean, I don't know what's apparent to you, right, on what you're seeing on your side, but it's like interesting because you're sensing, right? You're like, oh, that's okay. That's a belief. That's a belief right there that we need to go into and fix or change, And what are you listening for when you hear someone talk about their different beliefs?
I had a client tell me I was a good sifter once
Mm,
because people would talk and I would, or kind of like panning for gold, I guess. I don't know, one of the something. That's just from experience. That's, I've been doing this since 2011. And so I can hear, in fact, when I first learned how to do Psych K, I had to learn to not point out everybody's limiting beliefs because they don't want to hear it unless they ask, right? And it's like
yeah,
be in a conversation, oh, there's a limiting belief, and they're like, I had to work really hard to not do that. So
yeah,
you hear them, you can recognize them. Once you know what they are, they're pretty easy to spot, easier in others than to see them in yourself sometimes. But
yeah.
so just listening, you can hear people say things like, it's just the way I always am, or,
Mm,
uh, you, they say things that are like, oh, let's go back to that, or
hmm.
a statement that implies a scarcity mentality. Well, there just
Yeah,
aren't so many XYZ out there. Well, that's a belief, right?
right.
I mean, unless you can finitely count, the number of cars in your garage or something like that, you don't know how many clients there are out there, or, it's just a limiting belief that are holding people back. So
Yeah.
when you hear things like that, it's easy, I've never been any good at that, or I'm terrible at technology. Well, that's probably a belief.
Yep.
I've helped people with that, and they stop being overwhelmed and intimidated by technology because it's not a fact.
Right. Yeah, and to your point, I mean that's those beliefs. They're simple things people say, but they definitely impact how people behave too, right? They
Mhm.
impact what results they get. And I think people
Absolutely.
they don't understand how much language matters and how much what they say matters in terms of their ability to do things, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And they say it out loud, and it's also the little conversation going on silently in their head.
Hmm.
And if neither of those are supporting what you want to do, that can be changed.
Yeah. So in terms of reinforcement, because we talked about this as well, right? Like, what do folks do when they like? So the session happens and you change these beliefs. What do folks like? There's steps afterwards you recommend, right? Do you want to talk? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and it's pretty simple. Whenever I have a session with a client, I ask them before we end the session. Um, and we could have done 2 balances, we could have done 10.
Hmm.
You never know how fast they're going to go. Usually, any one belief you can change in less than 5 minutes. Sometimes it takes longer, or sometimes more talking is needed. But it's you can have a variety of number of beliefs, but at the end of the session I ask them to pick one action step they can do. They've changed all these beliefs and now they have to do something to act like it,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So and that action step is a proxy for all the statements, even if they weren't on the same topic. It's just doing something to symbolize the fact that things are different and now I do this.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that because again, reinforcement definitely. I mean, especially with psychological stuff, it's important. It's really extremely important.
Yeah.
So, what was the? This might be a weird question, but what's been the toughest balance you've ever had to do? if there is such
Toughest,
thing as a tough balance?
they're pretty straightforward. Um, well, I had one with myself that
Mm,
because I'm doing one with myself all the time, right? I've been doing it since 2011. I haven't gotten to the bottom of my list yet. But
mm,
when I first started the business, which was a few years after I learned how to do this, I was in a networking meeting, and there was a woman there who did web TV shows, talk shows,
mhm,
and she was curious about what I did and asked if I'd like to be a guest on her show. And I was not at that time comfortable speaking in front of people.
mm.
And so my head was absolutely, that's wonderful. And my voice, my head and my voice were going, that's wonderful. I'd love to. Absolutely. Yes, let's pick a date. The rest of my body was screaming. It was like, no. So it was in total panic and horror at the thought of being on a TV screen and trying to talk. Um, and so I came home and I started doing balances with myself and I don't know where that came. I had been like that a lot of my life. I'd taken piano. I hated the recitals. I mean, it was like I always hated the whole room looking at what I was doing.
Mhm.
Um, but I did a lot of work with myself, and so I thought I was ready, and and I got in the car, and as the closer I'm getting, I can tell there's still something there, right? It's
Mm.
like not sure what it is, but there's a little bit of anxiety getting ready to pop out. So before I got out of the car and went into the where we were doing the show, I took care of that, right? And I was so glad I did because I walked in and there were 5 cameras live streaming this thing. It was an
Wow.
hour-long show. One of them was even something like bid chat or something. People could stop you mid-sentence if they bid a certain amount of money and ask you any kind of question. Nobody
Hmm.
did that. Um, but but yeah, it was a lovely conversation. I enjoyed myself. I wasn't, you know, visibly or even invisibly upset with any of the process. And when
Mhm.
I watched it later, once I had access to the recording, I didn't, it was fine. It was like, oh wow, that wasn't bad, right?
Yeah.
I didn't make a fool of myself, But if I hadn't done that, they would have had to stop airing it. It would have been, turn off all the cameras and put a movie up or something. I mean, it would have been so uncomfortable for everybody to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so that was one of my big ones for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fascinating. Gets to something though important, right? Which I think was something I struggled with too when we did our session, right? Which is how do you select which beliefs to work on, right? I think that was a challenge for me as well when we were working together on that, because I was trying to figure out like what, and you help me with this obviously because you can hear the beliefs and you hear what we don't necessarily hear when we're talking to ourselves, right? Um, but any advice for people who let's say someone wants to work with you, any advice for what they target in terms of what beliefs or that they can start with?
Start with the situation that hurts the most. I mean, go for the priorities, right? I mean, whatever it is that you want to be different the most,
Hmm.
that's where I would start. And then we just figure out what it is contributing to the situation. If it's emotions that come up with it, we can kind of transform those to be a little bit more peaceful. When I work with phobia people, it's like we go with that, transforming the emotion that comes up with the phobia first. And then we see if there are other specific belief statements that also would help get them to where they want to be. And it doesn't end up with them wanting to hug a snake if that's their phobia, but it does let them choose when they see one what to do, as opposed to have that panic reaction that they have no control over.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that's also important to note too. Is like it's not like magic, right? It's not gonna
Mhm.
just like, oh, I went from being afraid of spiders to now I love spiders. I want to go hug. It's more just about that choice. It's giving them the choice as opposed to just triggering immediately and being reactionary, right?
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
now I can choose to be creative about the situation
Hmm. Hmm.
and respond the way I choose to.
Yeah. I mean, I've had people who couldn't go into rooms because they thought a mouse was in there. And I've had somebody who's soon to be stepson was a snake lover. And she was going to need to be able to be around snakes, maybe not personally handling them, but she needed to be able to know they were there and not freak out. Lots of people with getting on airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't influence this by logic or data. People with fear of flying probably know it's safer to get on the plane than drive to the airport statistically. That
Yep.
does not change their panic reaction. you know, so
Right.
yeah,
It's not logical, right? It's not about logic at all.
it didn't. No.
No, it's important it's important to remember that piece of it because I think people attack it with logic. They're attacking feelings with logic, and it doesn't really those two don't really add up.
And they
So
blame themselves when they're trying to change a situation. They tell
mm,
themselves they aren't working hard enough, or they didn't have enough discipline about it, or they don't know enough, or they're not, not enough in some other capacity, or they just don't deserve to have that outcome. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that goes on there
yeah,
that they think is causing the issue. And usually it's just subconscious beliefs that are making it really hard.
yeah, and then the danger of that is it creates even more beliefs to undo and to change, and
Yeah.
that are even more unproductive for them.
Mm-hmm.
So when you made this shift, I mean, when did you know that this is what you wanted to do long term, and that IT management wasn't the thing for you?
um, I knew it as soon as I saw it.
Mm,
Honestly, it was just, this is so cool, right? I've got to learn more. And so I went to the first basic workshop, and I wasn't planning on it being a business at the time. I was just learning it for me and people I knew. And I had to take the next level, and then I had to take the next level, and then I had to take, I took all the levels because I could not get enough of it. It's fascinating to me. What's in the subconscious and how it plays out in somebody's life, and how it's really not that hard to change things.
mm. No, that's a powerful realization to have, though, right? I mean, because you go from being, I'm not saying you were this, but a lot of people are in this boat where they're like, this is my circumstance. I'm just in this. I can't change it. I can't do anything about it. I just got to live and just operate this way
Yeah,
and survive, as opposed to thriving and hoping for something better, right?
absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I do these things. It's why I talk on podcasts. It's why I wrote a book. It's why I do blogs and newsletters and presentations and speaking opportunities, because I want people to understand, if they look for the patterns, if there are patterns that are not the way they want them to go in relationships or business or self-esteem or whatever it is, there are subconscious beliefs that are almost certainly behind that, and they can be changed. So, I really want people to get that message.
Yeah. No, and it's a great message to spread, to be honest with you. So when did you make that shift in terms of saying, like, this is going to be a business now? Like, it went from curiosity to being like, this is what I want to do
Yeah.
for a
It was
business.
It was 3 years later. It was in 2014. I decided to make it a business because it was just too good. I wanted to have a larger reach.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was it. Basically, it was just, I love doing this. Let's make it a business and devote full time to it. Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, to make that shift, it takes a lot of courage, and a lot of people don't. They're like, a lot of people don't make that shift intentionally like that. They're not like, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to do this. It's more like, I don't want to do that, so this is better than that, right?
Right. Well, and that's the whole point with the subconscious beliefs. Half of what people do is because they're trying to avoid something
Yeah, they're trying
instead
to
of
avoid
doing what
pain.
they want to do. Right? Sometimes they don't even know what they want to do. They just know what they don't want.
Yeah, and the metaphor I use, because I'm a huge nerd and like to use movie references, but the metaphor I use is the running away from people in a horror movie, right? Like the killer's behind you, and they're looking back, and I'm running away from that thing, and then they trip over a branch, and then they fall and they get killed, right? Versus the person who looks at the car, I'm shooting for the car. I don't care what that person's doing back there. I know he's back there. I'm gonna go for the car, and then they jump over the branch, get to the car, and escape, right?
Yes, you gotta figure out where you want to go and then focus on it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So 2020 hits, right? Pandemic, everything goes
yeah.
crazy.
Uh-huh.
How do you shift from the in-person to online with this?
I already had over half of my clients
Oh, wow.
online anyway, and I also had one group that I was also already virtually networking with. So I was used to Zoom. I was used, well, actually I wasn't using Zoom at the time, but I was using something that was like that. And it was simple to just cut out the drive time and being in two places to see people. You know, it was a simpler calendar. It was a simpler thing of, I always sit down here, you know, to see a client instead of, oh, it's Tuesday at noon, I need to drive there to see them.
Yeah.
So it didn't take any pivoting on my part. It was just simplifying.
Nice. That's great, because again, you're already prepared to do that, so it makes sense. That's awesome. Well, the last question I ask all folks as I come to the end here is inspiration wise, right? Who was the biggest inspiration for you, either a person or what, in terms of book or movie or TV show? What inspired you on your journey as you got to where you are here?
Recently, like since I've known Psych K, Bruce Lipton. He wrote The Biology of Belief and The Honeymoon Effect. He's a cellular biologist. And, you know, the work he has done on beliefs impacting health is really, you know, it's amazing when you read his books of what happens to people with placebos, right? I mean, they always take placebos out of the tests because, you know, but they don't try to find out, well, why does the placebo work? Well, it's the belief that they think it's working, right? Well, let's take the belief out, you know, and it's like, but, you know, wouldn't we be better if they just believed the sugar pill would work on them instead of something that maybe has horrible side effects? And the reverse, right? You get a diagnosis that's dire. I don't know that all those doctors are that good at prognosticating. I think people believe what they're told, and frequently that's the way it plays out. So the more people who understand kind of the mechanics of that, epigenetics is what he talks about. He was one of the pioneers with it. And it's like, you know, there are very few things that we are doomed to experience because they're genetically upstream from us. Right? There's something that turns that gene on. It's not like a given, and so it's the environment, it's the belief systems, it's the stress in the body. There's other things that happen. So he's a really interesting person to read or listen to. He's out there on a lot of YouTube things.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I gotta check him out. Actually, I haven't had a chance to do that yet, but I'm curious. You mentioned something that I think it would be interesting. This is more of a general comment, though. I'd be curious to see how medications that they test with the placebo, you know, the trials, how much it would change things if they told people that they're taking the actual medication and see if it still works versus the placebo.
They've done studies with telling people with that this is a placebo, and it's for some reason they know it, but it's for some reason that'll still work in some of the tests that they've done. They've also done stuff with, you know, different sizes and colors of the pills are more believable than others. It's
I mean,
I don't remember what they are because I don't take much, but it was I do remember reading that and going, isn't that interesting that there's even a color that makes it more likely people are going to believe it's going to be effective.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, psychology is a very, very fascinating thing. I mean, like I said, we don't know 90% of what the brain does, really. You know, we know how we can use 10% of it. That's all we know. And, you know, that movie Lucy is really fascinating. And also Limitless. I don't know if you've seen either one of those. Those great movies. Really fascinating. Check them out if you get a chance. I'll send you some links so you can check it out. But they're really interesting. I mean, they're science fiction, obviously, right? But they're science fiction based on the concept that we only know 10% of what the brain does, like capability wise. We don't know what would happen if we access the remaining parts of the brain. So
we don't, and we also don't, because the observer influences the outcomes. You know, a lot of what we think is true is, you know, influenced by beliefs of the observers.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of unknowns out there.
Absolutely. Well, Judy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I really appreciate it. You're doing some really cool stuff, and I hope you keep sharing that with the world. Other folks who are looking to get in touch with and find out more about Psych K or talk to Judy and have maybe a session with her, her information will be in the chat, in the description box below, not in the chat. Feel free to reach out to her. And yeah, thanks again, Judy. I really appreciate the time.
I enjoy talking with you always.
Thanks so much. Likewise. Talk to you soon. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.